You know, there's some wackos here that think women should be able to teach and preach. And there's wackos here that actually think Jesus is going to come back and reign on earth for 1,000 years. And there's some wackos that think he's doing it now, in and through his church. And then there's wackos that reckon that the only truly Christian worship song has a theologically correct framework. And of course, there's wackos that believe women can't teach and preach. And there's wackos that don't even think there's going to be a millennium reign. And any song sung in love from a heart of worship is worship, even if it doesn't make a theologically correct or astute statement. You know what we learn from all that? We're a mixed bunch of wackos with different opinions. And that's fine. That's the beauty of the Baptist Church, at least, that we have liberty of conscience to be able to read and discuss and assess and hold opinions. Isn't it beautiful, the freedom we have as we're united by the one true God in the Holy Spirit, because Jesus Christ died for our sins and we have faith in him and therefore will not perish but have eternal life. Isn't that good? Which leads me to introduce you to Dr. Taz Walker, who I will not call a wacko. Yet. But if he was, he'd fit in perfectly around here, wouldn't he? He's going to share with us today some evidence that supports the biblical narrative and probably is, different from a popular narrative. Who knows? I encourage you all to enjoy. I encourage you to be able to assess the evidence, to be able to enjoy listening to the evidence presented here this morning, and to be able to have the freedom to walk out of this room with the same opinion you came in with, or a different one. You're free. And it's great because we're free in Christ. But at the end of the day, you're just another wacko we love. And that's important. So let's have a coffee when it's all said and done. Without further ado, Dr. Taz Walker, thanks for coming, mate, and the Creation Ministries team. Thanks, mate.
That's a great introduction. I feel so welcome now. That's great. I feel like I'm at home. I'm at home. So I'll be asking some questions just to see how observant you are, all you wackos, that way, see how much you notice of things. And I was told that I needed to wear something like smart casual. And I realised I could have worn a t-shirt and my sneakers, shorts. It would have been good, eh? Anyway, here I am. And it's good to see you all. And we're just going to make sure this is going to work. I checked it out with the guys at the back, and we tested it all out, didn't we? Let's see what happens. Nothing. There you go. Okay, you'll have to click the button for me. Was that me or you? Anyway, so you'll have to click it for me. So I don't know what are we talking about today. The other thing, one of the things I love about this church, there's no clock around. So I've got no idea how long we've been here or that, although I have got a watch, but it's... Oh, you've got one. I got a watch, but it's on Brisbane time, so I'll be right. So I wanted to see just how much you know about things, how observant you are, and if I click this button, it worked. Oh, good on you, mate. That's great. I did it. And don't touch it again. Good on you. Anyway, can anybody tell where I am? My wife took this photograph. Does anybody know where I am? I don't know if you would notice that. Can you tell where I am? What'd you say? Drumheller. Ah, okay. It sounds like you know where that is. Do you know where Drumheller is? No, you don't. How did you know it was in Drumheller? It's on the sign. That's the sign as you're going into this town. It's actually in Canada. And I was in Canada and some people said, you have to go to Drumheller. You have to go to Drumheller. And can anybody suggest maybe why Drumheller's famous? What Drumheller's famous for? Dinosaurs, that's right. And so that's the sign. And I went to have a look. They've got a big museum there and looked at some dinosaurs. And you can see Drumheller's sort of in like a river valley. And so you can see as the edges of the river come up, the embankment there, you can see the layers of rock. Can you see the layers there? Layers of sediment. And so this whole area, this whole province of Canada is covered in this sediment, a bit like in the middle of Australia, actually, in Queensland and New South Wales. It's a bit like that. And so they find lots of fossils in these layers, and and they got a museum there. And this is one of the fossils that they found. Click it, please, Micah. It's a fossil of a dinosaur. And it's got these three horns. It's called Triceratops. And I love the way paleontologists give it names. Triceratops horridus. Don't you like that name? Triceratops horridus. And I often, when I'm showing pictures of dinosaurs to kids, and the kids have gone out, but I'm sure they would have been able to follow this. But I ask questions about dinosaurs. I love dinosaurs. So I'll ask the question here. What do you notice about the dinosaurs? Anybody notice anything? Just let me know what you notice about that dinosaur. Nothing. No teeth? That's right. It's got no teeth. It's actually got a big beak. That's right. There's something I noticed, but I just wonder if anybody else will notice it too. What else do you notice? Horns. It's got the horns, and it's got the two up here, and there's one that goes off the nose. Not very big on this one, so Triceratops. Yeah, I noticed the horns. That's pretty good. There's something else I had noticed about it. Anybody else notice? Hey?
Big leg bones.
Big leg bones. That's right. And three toes. Hey, smiling. Is it smiling? Did you say smiling? A bit like the people playing the music up here. They were smiling, except the lady playing the flute. I didn't see her. That right? But there's something else I noticed, and yes, usually when I'm in a class of primary kids, it goes on and on and on and on and on, and they find these things, and I say, well, I'll tell you what I noticed. None of you are going to guess it. I noticed that it's dead. Did you notice it was dead? Did you notice that? Although I must say, in a group like this, sometimes there's an older bloke in the group like this, a dad joke, and he says, I noticed it hasn't had anything to eat for a while. Anyway, so that's the Triceratops. And so, and I make the point, like I'm from Creation Ministries, it's to do with science. We're talking a little bit about science, so I don't want to scare you. But I make the point about this is they found this in the sediments in the province of Alberta, and they dug it out. The paleontologists dug it out, and they brought it here and have sort of put it together, and they've got it on display. And that's science, isn't it? I studied as an engineer, and we did a lot of science and engineering, and we had to do physics and do experiments in physics and things like that, and electrical stuff, measuring voltages. And the big problem was you could never get the right answer. We'd do the assignments, and we'd come up with the wrong answers, and we'd have to do it again. And that's what science is about. It's about careful measurements, about observation, and that sort of thing. And it's repeatable. Like you can go to the museum and you can photograph it. Somebody else can go along and measure it and how big it is. You can do chemical analyses on it. And that's science. And that's the power of science. It doesn't matter whether, you're a Christian or an atheist or a Hindu. You go along and you all get the same answer because you're all looking at the same evidence. Does that make sense? And that's the power of science. And so people, when things go wrong, people go and check it out and find out what's happening and do the experiments, and it works. And so that's what this is happening in this Alberta. They dug up this dinosaur. But I'll tell you what they didn't find when they dug it up. I've got something to show you. They didn't find a label on it which said 68 million years old. They didn't find that. And that's what's presented in this museum. They present this evidence, and they're 68 million years old. And you think, well, how did they work that out? Was there a calendar next to it or something? And so I just want to make the point. This is probably the biggest point that I'm ever going to make. And so after this, you can go home. But the biggest point is that what's presented to us is a mixture of science, observable science, and some sort of a philosophy tied into it. And the philosophy is the 68 million years, and that comes out of a belief system which became popular some 200 years ago with the new geology. And a guy by the name of Charles Lyell wrote a book called Principles of Geology, and it was a very influential book in the life of Charles Darwin. And when he went on his voyage around the world, that was the book that he took with him, and Darwin was very interested in geology, and he used this philosophy. But so 68 million years old. I mean, that's fair enough. What's the matter? Is there any problem with that? There is a problem with that. In our church, I'm part of a Baptist church. I came to know the Lord through Boys Brigade in a Baptist church. And it's amazing when you come to know the Lord, realise He's real. Jesus is real. He answers my prayers. And He walks with me and talks with me. There's a song about it, isn't there? And I remember in our church, there was a lady. She said, well, I don't really think it matters whether God created in 6 days or it took millions of years. So the important thing is that God created. And I thought, well, that sounds reasonable. And you know, I just thought you'd just pick things up as you go along. But somebody pointed out to me the issue with this idea of 68 million years for these dinosaur bones, a dead dinosaur. And it goes back to, like, you know, God created. We read there that God created in the beginnings. He did it in 6 days. Amazing. And in this next picture, I've got a picture of what it was like when He'd finished His creation. Just in case you don't know, that is a cartoon. It was drawn by an artist. There was nobody there at the time. But here, he's drawn it with pretty pictures of the coloured flowers and the geese standing there, so cute, aren't they? And the green, it's so green. And you've got the birds flying. And it's such an idyllic picture. And can you imagine? You can imagine Eve saying, oh, Adam, this is such a perfect world. And Adam saying, yes, Eve, it's very good, just like God said. That's what He said, isn't it? When He finished the creation, He looked at everything He made and He says, behold, it was very good. And it was good. But, you know, if we've got this dead dinosaur, this Triceratops horridus, and all the other dinosaurs, and all the other stuff that's, you know, we find the fossils of them, and 68 million years is long before Adam and Eve. And so where do we put all these layers of rock? They go in before Adam and Eve, like that, see? Just like that. And of course, this is an artist's impression. They're not stuffed full of fossils like that, although some places are. But, you know, this is just to illustrate a point. And so you've got all this death and disease, death, suffering, and disease before Adam and Eve. And that sort of creates a problem as to where did that come from? How did that get there? And do you see the issue with that? That's a big issue that really neuters the gospel, because we read in the New Testament, it says, as by one man sin came into the world, and death through sin. Even so, you know, and so death has come upon all people. And the Bible talks about death as being the last enemy. And when people get sick, nobody thinks, yoo-hoo, what a wonderful blessing. Sickness is a terrible thing. And Jesus went around, you know, it says He was filled with the Holy Spirit, and He went around healing all those who were under the oppression of the devil. And so this is from the devil. And so it's before Adam and Eve, before sin came into the world. And that, to me, made a real big problem about it as to how to answer that. And that's really, I suppose, my challenge today is, just like Pastor Darren said, is, you know, there may be things that you sort of hear today and that I talk about, is to do your own investigation. So it maybe sets us on a journey to sort of say, where does this land? How does this fit? How do I handle the stuff that I'm learning at uni? How do I help my children, you know, navigate it as well, doing their HSC and their science, three exams on science? Is that going to affect them? And so the Bible tells us in 1 Peter, the Apostle Peter says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. I met a lady in Armidale many years ago, and she said that she she didn't like to talk about Jesus. She was a Christian. She went to church. But the reason she didn't like to talk about it was people would bring up issues that she didn't have answers for. They'd say, well, if God is so good, why are there so many bad things in the world? And what about evolution? And what about natural selection and those sorts of things? And so she found it just much more easy just to keep quiet and not bring it up at all and get into an argument. Isn't that interesting? But the Apostle Peter says, be prepared, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks. And this is really cool, because once you know the answers, once you've been prepared, it just changes our whole confidence about life and about Christ and everything else. And so we come back to this thing, and we sort of think, how does that work? You know, I tried to fit this in to the days of Genesis, you know, what was created on day 1 and day 2 and the different fossils falling into different places. And it was just hopeless to try to fit it in. And somebody eventually figured out, it was after I was married and I was in my 20s, that the key thing is actually this fossil record was not formed at creation. It formed after creation during Noah's flood. So it was not before sin. These fossils are after sin. Ah, man, that makes a difference to me. You know what I mean? It sort of fits in together. And so and I'm going to talk about Noah's flood just briefly. That's why we're talking about the rocks, the fossils, and the age of the earth. Now, I don't know if there are any, 120 hours. What's that sound like? 120 hours. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? 120 hours? 120 hours? Hey? What were you saying? That's right. So you've been on your L's for 120 hours? You know all about it. You must have a teenager, have you? 120 hours, that's right. 120 hours. There you go, 120 hours. I just think the government's so mean, don't you? I mean, why do they put parents through this turmoil, this torment? Well, what have they got in mind? Just doing this, just an arbitrary. In Queensland, it's 100 hours. You got 120. Why do they do that? We know why they do that, don't we? They need to be prepared. The people learning, these teenagers learning, they need to be exposed to different sorts of driving conditions so that they know how to handle it and they don't get injured or have accidents and there's no tragedies around. And so we're quite happy to go along with that and to help them learn and help them to become competent. And that's what we're talking about here, is about learning, about being prepared. That's about being prepared. And the Apostle Peter says we need to be prepared. And actually, there's danger for kids. Driving is dangerous for kids, isn't it? It's dangerous and terrible things can happen. But there's actually a bigger danger for the children in our culture, in Australia, and that is the things that they're picking up which take them away from the church, which suggests to them that they can't believe what they learned in Sunday school, that what they learned in Sunday school that is not true. The Bible's a lot of mythology. The way it really worked is like this and like this. And they put forward evidence, and the kids just teenagers, they just accept it because it seems so convincing. And so that's why it needs to be prepared. I think if you're going into that sort of environment, children need at least to be warned about. I used to warn my boy about crossing the road, just in our street. And I was very particular about that because of the potential danger of it. And so what's happening is actually something like 2 out of 3 young people who grow up in church in our culture drop out when they become teenagers. I don't know if you know anybody like that. You may know people. They drop out. That's a major issue in churches today. So that's why we're talking about this particular issue. And there's lots of, when you're talking about creation and about evolution, which is what the kids learn at school, the way they start in preschool, they learn about dinosaurs in preschool. And I was in a meeting once where I was talking about dinosaurs, and I put a picture up of a dinosaur, And I said, does anybody know the name of that dinosaur? There's a little kid at the back sort of said, he put his hand up, he said, it's a Triceratops. And I said, really great. Where did you learn about that? He said, at preschool. And his mother her eyes just about popped out of her head about how intelligent her boy was. And I said, does anybody know how long ago this dinosaur lived on the earth? And he put his hand up again. And I said, yes. And he said, 100 million years ago. So he's not even in first grade of school yet. 100 million years ago. And once again, his mother just about freaked out. It's incredible. And so we see that kids are being exposed to this from a very early age. And I went to a youth group meeting a number of months ago, and a mother emailed me beforehand. And she didn't sort of want to have a go at me about anything, but she wanted to ask my help. She said, my son has just started at university, and he's coming home with all these questions which I can't answer. So mother couldn't answer them. She didn't know where to go to get answers. And she wrote them all in an email, and she said, can you please answer these questions at the youth meeting? And I did my best to deal with them, but I thought I'd just mention some of them so you can see some of the questions, and I don't know if you can answer them. But one of the things is, doesn't natural selection prove evolution? That's what they teach at high school and at university. Natural selection proves evolution. And it actually doesn't. There's free brochures in next door about, do you know the difference between natural selection and evolution? And there's another one, about where did we come from? They teach children in year 10 that we came from apes. So here's the kids trying to think about life and what they're going to do with their lives and whether they're going to get married and what sort of career they're going on. And they're teaching them that they came from apes. And so that affects the way you think about yourself. Don't you think it does? And so one of the questions this lady asked me was, is chimp DNA similar to humans? That's what they teach them. That the DNA of chimps is just 98% the same as humans. Has anybody heard that? 98%. And actually it's not. If you look at the Y chromosome of the males, there's a huge difference. But I won't go into that now. Does quantum physics prove the Big Bang? Quantum physics, that's a big word. Big Bang, that's a big word. So it must be true. You see how, but it doesn't actually. That did happen a different way. Are dating methods reliable? And you get a lot of information about dating methods and the isotopes and the radioactive decay and the nucleus of the atom and you hear all this technical stuff and you just think it must be true. But in actual fact, there's a big problem. I'm going to talk about it later, a big problem with dating methods, and I'm going to see if you can sort of see what the problem is. And they're not reliable, and is Genesis poetry? People say, oh, look, it's just poetry. It's just poetry. You don't believe that. It's a legend. It's mythology. It's just dressing it up in nice languages. But actually, it's not poetry. It's historical narrative. Although if you've got the NIV version and you see they set out a couple of verses in a poetic format, and even those verses, they're saying things the same. It's not really as if it's different from what the other part of the narrative. And anyway, there's also a lot of poetry in the Bible which is just reporting historical narrative. Miriam's song, when they crossed the Red Sea, she wrote a song about it. And that's poetry, but it reflected very accurately what happened in real life in the Red Sea. And so these are some of the questions. See how it's destabilizing it is for young people to be encountering this. And if nobody has informed them, if nobody has sort of forewarned them, that they just become casualties. And so that's what we want to talk about, what I want to talk about right now. And one of the things I want to illustrate is, people, you might be thinking, I'm coming along, I'm going to prove to you and bring all this evidence to you that the Bible's actually true. Well, it is actually true, but you can't really do it that way. What I want to do is I want to talk about evidence, like here's some evidence for dinosaurs, right? These are dinosaurs, and two people are looking at this evidence. And there's a guy on this side, he's got a pair of glasses on, and somebody on this side with a pair of glasses. Can you see that? And that illustrates just how that when you're wearing a pair of glasses, we've all got glasses of a belief system in our head, and this belief system affects the way we see evidence. And this might surprise you, is that when you think about evidence, what's got more evidence? More evidence for creation or more evidence for evolution? It's actually the same evidence. Do you see that? They're both looking at the same evidence. It's the same. The evidence is the same. It's the same dinosaurs. It's the same rocks. It's the same fossils. It's the same isotopes. It's the same planets. It's the same Earth. All the evidence is the same. So what's different? The difference is the way you look at the evidence, the way you interpret the evidence. And I'll show you just an example or two later on about how you can be if you know about it, if you know how to look through a different set of glasses, if you sort of know that, and you can sort of look at evidence and you can do the switch yourself of what you read in the newspaper, what you see on television. You can do the switch and be able to see that they're presenting it from an evolution. This supports evolution. There is no God. God never made anything. But you can do the switch and you can see, hey, they're actually reporting evidence that shows that God is real. And that's really an amazing thing to do. And what we did is that what I hope today is that what this will do. So we're talking about looking at things, that it'll affect the way you look at things. You'll be able to see things differently. And it'll show you that, you'll be able to see that when you look at it from that way, creation makes sense, sort of like factual. And then that will give you confidence in the Word of God. So you'll be able to sort of have that confidence rather than not be sure, not be, being timid about talking about your faith. And also, what I want to do is to sort of give you a way to protect your family. I mean, as parents, we're the guardians of our children, aren't we? And so how do you protect your family against what they're being taught at school? And how do you protect, give your children sort of the resources to be able to work it out for themselves? And that's what I want to do today, to be able to do that for you. And so we talked about that fossil record. And I said it's Noah's flood is the key. And that, for me, was like a light going on in my 20s. And it started me on a journey. I trained as an engineer. I worked in the power industry for many years, producing electricity. And then I went back, because of Noah's flood, I went back and studied geology as a mature age student at the university and got a degree, honours degree in geology. And basically, because of the importance of geology to the whole of the Christian faith, the whole of the history of the world, and which is very interesting. So we go back to, what I'll do is, what have we got here? This is geology. Noah's flood's the key. There's a guy called Johan Hubers. He's a Dutch man, and he's a building contractor. He did a lot of work with his, building with his hammer. He's got a hammer in his hand there, hasn't he? And he built it's not really a replica, but it's a representation of Noah's Ark. And that's a very powerful thing, because most people think that Noah's Ark, the story of Noah's Ark and the story of the flood is just a fairy tale. But he builds this, and it's big enough and impressive enough to impact people's minds about the story and to cause them to do a rethink. And here it is next to the wharf in Holland. A friend of mine, a Dutch friend, he was over there and he took a photo for me. And people think, I never knew it was so big. I never knew the ark was so big. It's 140 metres long, had a capacity, you can work it out, 15,000 tonnes. It's incredibly stable, what the Bible says, incredibly stable. And he built an earlier version, a smaller version. He's working up to the big full-size one. But this was able to go down the canals in Holland. And look, the bridge is lifting up. You see the bridge lifting up there? And look at the people out looking at it as it's going down. And you see, Holland had a very much a Christian heritage, like Australia, like the England. But a lot of the countries which have had this great Christian heritage in recent years have abandoned it, as they have in Holland. And these people, they descended of parents and grandparents who were very much involved in the church. And they're looking at it and they thought, wow, Isn't that incredible? And they go home and they dig out the family Bible and they start reading what the Bible says about Noah's Ark, and they see how it matched what they saw on the canal. And that started them on a journey, and many have reported coming to the Lord, returning to the church as a result of being encouraged by Noah's Ark. So, and so you might be thinking, so how can I do something about my kids? Well, one of the things, I just want to encourage you, it's about getting information. And so we do try to help you get information. I'll mention a couple of things just now and something else later on, is there's an email newsletter. And basically, this comes out every couple of weeks. But you sort of, see, unless you get information, you really stay ignorant. And the Bible says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. You need to get some information. You need to set it up somehow in your home that there's information coming into your home on this very critical topic in our culture today. And the email newsletter is a very simple way of doing that. And I know that we're going to put some sheets at the back on the table right next to the coffee. And if you spill coffee on them, it doesn't matter, as long as you can write your email address on them, right? And you'll be connected to the newsletter. So the other thing is, or you can go connect.creation.com and you can sign on there. You can sign on there while I'm talking. And the other thing is, you need as a website where you can get information, creation.com. Now, I know it's a difficult name. If you want to find out about creation, where would you go to find out about creation? Creation.com. And that's right. And actually, both my daughters, they've got 7 children. They're beating you. You've got a couple more to go. And they rule the families with an iron rod, Not really, they're beautiful families, but they've got a lot of things to deal with, And one of the things that they can, make sure they deal with is, their children and their education. And so if one of the kids comes home and they start talking about what they're learning at school, and it's to do with something about, we evolved from apes, or, dinosaurs are 100 million years old, and the kids might be really picking up on this and enthused about it, my daughter will say, well, hang on, let's just check this out. And she'll go to creation.com. Come here, sit down, and they do a search on that website, and they find out all this information about what they're learning at school. And so then the next day, the kid goes to school and he's informed. He's informed about it. Do you see how that works? He's protected. He can't be fooled or tricked by what he's learning at school. And I've got one of my granddaughters in the final year at school in year 12. She had to write an assignment about the evidence for evolution. And she got the evidence, I forget what she had, but some had fossils, some had radioactive dating and the various things. And they had to go through this evidence, and they had to show how this evidence shows that evolution's true. And talk about the pressure that's on the kids at that time. My granddaughter wrote the assignment for it, and they handed in a draft. The teacher checked the draft, then they did their final assignment. And so when she handed in a draft, the teacher said, wow, that was a very interesting article. I learned things in that I didn't know before. The teacher said this. And she said, but you got the wrong conclusion. You've got to conclude that evolution's true. And my granddaughter, sort of not knowing quite how to handle this, she's sort of a bit timid about it. And she's sort of looking at the teacher, and the teacher said, well, what's wrong? Don't you believe in evolution? What rock did you come out from under? And this is going on in the class, and the other kids who are doing their assignments all stopped and are watching this stuff going on with my granddaughter. And anyway, it was a very interesting exchange. And I'm very proud. My granddaughter actually became the dux of the school because she's so ignorant she didn't believe in evolution. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that incredible? And so that's the way it goes. Now, if Noah's flood is the key, I remember talking to one of my engineer colleagues at work, and he said, oh, yeah, but where did all the water come from? I mean, how can that be true? And that's the sort of thing. That's just what happens when we start to take the Bible seriously. There's all these questions come up. And I sort of tried to interest him in the Bible at work. And he just sort of went on about how the water couldn't cover the earth and blah, 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 blah. And that sort of thing. And so in geology these days, it's easy to understand how the water could cover the earth. And did you know the Earth's got a crust around it? There's a crust around the whole of the Earth. There's a continental crust and there's oceanic crust. And the crust is like the shell of an egg. And the crust of the Earth is broken. It's broken into lots of pieces. You might have known that. And here's a picture of where geologists, how they've delineated the pieces of the crust. And they call them plates. And you can, in Australia, it's on a plate called the Australian plate. Amazing name, Australian plate. The Pacific Ocean is in the middle of the Pacific plate. But you can see how it's broken up. And so these plates move, and they can go up and down. And when they move, they can suddenly move in jerks. You know, it builds up pressure, builds up pressure, builds up pressure, and all of a sudden, boom, they move. And that creates huge tragedies on the earth. There was one that happened off the Indonesia in 2004, and 200,000 people died in the Indian Ocean tsunami. And there was another big tsunami that occurred off Japan, you know, some years after that. And so you've got these plates, and I took a photo where you got an egg at home, and I showed that, you know, that's a little bit what it's like. The eggshell is actually thicker by comparison to the shell of the earth. And so it's very easy to imagine how the earth could be covered in water. All you need is to move the plates a little bit up and down. And so can you see a picture here of it's supposed to represent the continent sitting up above the ocean. And this is sort of the ocean basin down. And all you need is that the plates move. And this part goes up and this part goes down. And if the surface of the earth makes smooth, there's enough water in the ocean. Battery's flat, but what? Of my microphone. Can you hear me? No? You can hear me? I don't know. Oh, I've got a time to take it away. Thank you very much. Did you do that, Micah? I don't understand. They're pointing at each other. There you go. They're good guys. They really do well. Anyway, so are we talking about the ocean going up and down? The plates going up and down. So you can easily imagine. Smoothed it out. There's enough water in the ocean now. There's enough. I can't find the pocket anymore. Anyway, 3 kilometres. Only 3,000 metres. Enough water on the whole now. So, what it means is during Noah's flood. So, you know, if there really was a flood, like the Bible says, okay, what evidence did he expect to find? Buried in sedimentary rock. That's better. Thank you very much for that. And lie all over the earth. All over the earth. And so that's what you find. Here's an example of a fossil which is buried, an ichthyosaur. Can you see that? It's some 2 meters long, and it was found in limestone quarry in Europe somewhere. And did you notice it's a female ichthyosaur? Did you see the lipstick on its? Did you see that? No. Yeah. The way you tell it's a female is it's giving birth. Can you see that? It's giving birth to a baby ichthyosaur. And my children have had births. But, you know, they do take a little while for to be born. But can you imagine how long it would take for the ichthyosaur to be covered in sediment? Slowly, 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 slowly. It would have had to be buried rapidly. And as a matter of fact, the people who found this, the scientists who found this, they said it was snap frozen in time. And that's the sort of thing you'd expect from Noah's flood. You wouldn't expect it to take millions of years. So when I went to Canada, to Drumheller, and I looked it up on the web, the geologists recognised that Canada was covered in water, and they call it the Great Inland Sea, the same as Australia. The whole of every continent in the world has got evidence of being covered with water. So in this case, you can see where the Great Inland Sea went. They call it Eperic Seas. But there's places where there's no sediment, and that's where the mountains came up, the Rocky Mountains, you see that? And so there's no sediment on there, it's been washed off. And where they found the Drumheller, that's where it's located. They're right in the middle of where the water was, the sediments from the water covering it, and that's where they find all the fossils. And so here's the museum that I went to, a very fascinating museum, and the Royal Tyrrell Museum. There's a dinosaur there. Can you see the dinosaur on the features? And I had some good conversations with the people in there, and there were some people very open and some people not so open, and that's quite interesting. And then this Triceratops horridus, and we talked a little bit about the details of that. And I've made the point about science is evidence, and the philosophy. But you can see that would have taken a lot of sediment to bury that. And it would have had to be buried quickly. You get kangaroos that are killed. They disappear, dingoes and crows, and there's nothing much left after a little while. So it had to be buried quickly to be so well preserved. And that's another feature of Noah's flood, lots of sediment. And then here's another one, even bigger one. Talk about the toes on this thing. This is the leg of a sauropod. And you can see how it's going up about 2.5, and as you go down, it goes way, way up, over 3 meters long, just for the leg of the sauropod. So there's just some evidence. We could do a lot. There's books of fossils and things like that out there for people who are interested, and it's good to have those sorts of books in your home for the kids to flick through. But the other thing that I noticed, I was over there, and I was looking on the web, and I found this website called Live Science, and they were talking about a big find of dinosaurs in the area near Drumheller. In that area, they found these dinosaurs, and so there's a report on it. You can see the dinosaurs running around. That's an artist's impression, of course, and there's rain because there was a lot of water. And I'll just throw up this explanation of it, but that these paleontologists put up in this news article. It says a herd of centrosaurs, that's a type of horned dinosaur, drowning in a flood millions of years ago in what is now Alberta, as depicted in this illustration. And so, of course, drowning in a flood, right here, a little bit of rain and a flood, and it says here, they left behind what could be the world's largest dinosaur graveyard. So you're not talking about one dinosaur, you're talking heaps of dinosaurs in this great big graveyard in which they've been buried. And I mean, it doesn't sound like it happened slowly and gradually to me, does it to you? But you can change the way you look at it. You get this report, Live Science News, and you think, oh man, that's evidence, the flood of millions of years. No, you just sort of do a little switch. You watch as I change it here, just up there, watch in a flood, and you turn it around, drowning in Noah's flood, 4,500 years ago. You see, Noah's flood was a catastrophe. It doesn't take long for a catastrophe. And so that's why 4,500 years is not ridiculous, because it all happened quickly. And so you see how you make a transformation. And that's really important to know. Here's Three Sisters up at Katoomba, and you're looking out from Echo Point. You can see the sandstone in the foreground, right? And so there's a lot of sand being washed in. It's been washed in by water, and you can see that sandstone is in the distance, right, across the valley. And so we could do we've done field excursions here, but one of the interesting things to observe is across the valley how flat the surface is. Do you see how flat it is? They call it a plateau there, and you think, how in the world did it get to be so flat? When there's a flood, and when there's that sort of thing, often on farmers' property, they call it soil erosion, don't they? They try to stop water going across the land because it erodes the soil away, and it cuts these valleys and gullies in it. And so how did it get flat? Well, of course, Noah's flood talks about the waters rising to cover every high mountain. Every high mountain. So the water, would have covered this area here. It was a global flood. it would have covered this area here. So when the water covers the whole lot, basically that's when it carves the place flat. And we find, as the water went down after the flood, it sort of went down in sort of little jumps. So that's a really amazing explanation. And mainstream geologists, they call them the geomorphologists, people who study the shape of the surface. That's a puzzle as to how you can get a flat surface. What sort of process produces a flat surface? But then it's even more interesting. You know what? Noah was in the ark and he was doing science experiments. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat, and he was thinking, now when's this flood going to end? When are we going to be able to get off this boat, right? And so the mountains appeared after 2.5 months. That was a positive sign. And then after that, he let out the raven, didn't come back. Then a week later, he let out the dove, came back. And then another week later, he let out the dove again, and it came back with a leaf in its mouth. You know the story, don't you? And then he let out the dove again after another week, and it didn't come back. And so the water's going down, and eventually you read in the Bible how the land was dry and they came off the ark. So the water's going down. So as it's going down, this plateau appears above water. The plateau comes above water. So the water then has to carve, it runs off in these gullies, and it carves this big gully here. See, this great big valley. And geologists look at this, and they talk about the river that goes down it, and they say that river is too little for that valley. They call it an underfit river. Doesn't fit the valley. Is that incredible? And it's all rivers, nearly all rivers around the world are like that. And so that's a puzzle they've been working on for 100 years. I don't call it an underfit river. I call it an overfit valley. Because the valley was carved by the waters of Noah's flood as they're coming off the land. And once the water had gone, the valley was carved, and the river today just uses that valley. Isn't that incredible? Amazing evidence for Noah's flood. And you can see the sort of thing. Here's another example of a valley. This somebody gave it the name Little Grand Canyon. And you can see that it's about 30 metres high, it's 50 metres across, and there's a little creek running through this canyon. And you know, a geologist could look at this, come along and see it, and sort of think, wow, how long would it take that creek to carve that valley? Excepting it wasn't carved by the creek. It was carved by a mud flow. A volcanic eruption created a mud flow, and it carved this valley in one day. And people sort of were aware and saw it happen at that time. But that just makes the point that if you didn't see it happen, you could come to wrong conclusions, couldn't you? See how that works? And it was a eruption of the volcano Mount St. Helens on the west coast of the United States. And you can see how much was blown off the top. You know, incredible. 50 people were killed in this. And then since the explosion in 1980, there's been more lava pushing up, producing a new dome. And you can see the sort of where there's been erosion off the side of the flanks of this volcano, and that's where the valley was that I showed you. So you can see lots of amazing things. And I just want to mention just one thing. I could do a lot of things, but one thing is that you often see things which they say it takes millions of years to form diamonds, millions of years to form rocks. It takes millions of years to form opals, like this one. And even the jewelers will tell you that. They'll say it's millions of years in the making, and you can buy one, for your love of your life. And but there's a guy in New South Wales up in the opal fields at the north who was fossicking for opals, and he figured out how opals can form quickly. And he had a little tin shed on his property up there, and in his tin shed he would have these Vegemite jars, and he'd put the various sediment in and various liquid in, and within 10 days the opal colouring appeared because the silica sand absorbed the water and produced the opal. And it still needed to be cured a little bit to go hard, but in fact it shows it happens very quickly. So I want to get to this really complicated thing about radioactive dating. A lot of people think that radioactive dating, intimidated by it, just in awe of it, and about how they figure it out, and even the way they express the dates. They say 301 million years plus or minus 2 million years. You know, they're indicating just how accurate it is. And you sort of say, well, how does it work? Oh, it's simple. It's simple. Well, the easiest way to imagine it would be like, imagine an hourglass. You know, can you picture an hourglass? We don't have them these days, do we? Use electronic timers. But this is the hourglass. And it's just so you've got, you know, the stuff at the top is falling down into the stuff at the bottom. You've got this radioactive decay. And so all you do is you measure the stuff of the potassium and the argon. You just measure it, and you got the age. It's simple as that. Well, you know, if you've used an hourglass, that it's not quite like that. Is this if you have to turn it over such that all the sand is at the top and there's nothing at the bottom, right? If you turn it over so there's half and half, you don't really know what it is. And so that's the question. How much was the starting amount in there? Well, how would you find out the starting amount? That was at the start. How would you do that? Well, you can't do that. You can't go back in time and measure the starting amount. Isn't that interesting? You can make very accurate measurements now, but you can't go back in time and know what was there at the beginning when the rock formed. And then again, rocks are different from glass in a hourglass. They're different in that water goes into rocks and comes out of rocks as they lie around the land. And so you don't know if there's been any gained or any lost there. And you don't know if there's been any gained or any lost there. So you have to make assumptions. And you don't know if the rate stayed the same. And so all geologists know that every date that comes out, they know that it's based on assumptions. And so guess what? They don't believe it unless it fits in with what they think it should be. Did you know that? Did you know that geologists don't accept a date that it seems to not fit with what they think it should be? And that's the fact. And that's because they know it's all based on assumptions. And so there's a guy, as a creationist guy, is a bit sort of sneaky, I suppose you could say. What's the word you used? Wacko. He was wacko, that's right. Anyway, he collected a rock, a volcanic rock. So dating is done on volcanic rocks. Broke a piece off it and he crushed it up and sent it off to the laboratory. So the thing is, he didn't tell them how old the rock was, and so they didn't know what it was going to be. So they did the analysis and did the normal calculation and come up with an age. And the age that they came up with was 350,000 years. So it's simple as that. Just send it off to the lab and they'll tell you. But what he did, he broke another piece off, crushed it up, and he picked out the white mineral in the rock. There's a white mineral. And he sent a sample of the white mineral to the lab, and that came back with an age of 900,000 years. So that's interesting, isn't it? And then he did the same. He picked out the black mineral, and that came back with an age of 2,800,000 years. And so geologists are always faced with this issue when they get back a date from the radioactive dating lab, is to what does the number mean? What does it relate to? And you know, how do I make sense of that? And in actual fact, this rock came from the lava dome in Mount St. Helens. And here it is here, looking at the lava dome. And somebody went up there and collected the rock. It wasn't this crazy creationist, but it was somebody else. He got a sample of it. And there was an article which we did about radioactive dating, in particular this thing in Creation magazine. And this rock was 10 years old. The eruption occurred in 1980. It was collected in 1990. And it gave dates of 350,000 up to 2,800,000 years. And so you see, if it doesn't work for rocks where you know the age, why should you trust it for rocks where you don't know the age? So this is interesting, isn't it? Yeah, and if you want to find out a bit more about that, there's a huge discussion on creation.com about this particular rock. And also, I think you'd find other sites, the skeptical sites also, would be talking about this rock, so you can become informed about it. Now, we did an article about how dating methods work. And I'm not going to go through that. There's quite an interesting little experimental, interesting little illustration for how they work. And I talked a little bit about the need to know what it was in the past. And so this article is on the web. There's also there's free brochures. There's a free brochure out there about how dating methods work, and it's got this article plus a real-life example of how it was a skull in Africa was dated, and all the stuff that went on over a period of years trying to figure out the date. That's very interesting. But the point is this. This is the first point, the take-home point. There is no instrument that can measure the age. There are amazing instruments they use, but there's no instrument that can measure age. And so I'm going to ask, can anybody tell me why that is? That's a big statement. There's no instrument that can measure the age of something. Why is there no instrument? Yes? Humans aren't smart enough. That's right, but there's another thing about humans that is significant. Why is there no instrument that can measure the age? You can make amazing measurements. Isn't it measuring the age? Why is there no instrument that can measure the age? See, this is a big issue, big thing. Once you understand this, yes?
We can measure time accurately, but we can't measure age because we don't know the starting condition.
That's right. We can measure time. So I've been measuring how long I've been here. Hopefully I'm all right. I might be finished soon. But so because I read my watch when I started, I read my watch now, I know how long it's been. But if I can only look at my watch now and I didn't know what time I started, I don't know how long I've gone. And so there's no instrument you can measure now, but you need to know what it was at the beginning. Do you get that? Does that make sense? So when people quote an age, you can be confident to say, well, they weren't measuring the age. They measured something else. And I showed you potassium argon. They measured something else. Or it might be uranium, or it might be carbon-14. There's something else they're measuring, which they can do very well, but they don't know what it was back at the beginning when the sample formed. So that's the first one. So if you can't measure what's there, what do you have to do? So this is important. I think, this sort of makes sense. If you can't measure what was there when the sample formed, what do you do? What can you do? Extrapolate. So we could extrapolate, but even then, how do you know when you've got to that point? You can extrapolate. You guess. Does that make sense? You have to guess. You have to guess what was there. And geologists make these guesses, and they try to do them methodically and logically and consistently and not haphazardly. But they're all guesses, and they know that they're guesses. And so this is the second thing. All dating methods are based on assumptions. Did you know that? When they're making a date, you see the date and you think it's a scientific fact. In actual fact, it's based on an assumption. And so that's really important to know. So you can quite confidently say, I don't believe that date. And you're being very scientific. I don't believe that. I don't accept that date. And that's what happens, is you can get any age you like depending on the assumptions you make. If you don't like the age, then you can change your assumption and get a different number, which is more closely what you want. You can get any age you like, depending on the assumptions you make. You didn't know that, did you? Did you know that that's what happens? That's what happens. So you can be quite skeptical of these numbers, and then you can start to dig and to see what they actually did, what they measured. And the last one is, geologists do not accept dates that don't fit their expectations. They just say, well, there's something wrong with that. You see, if the geologists don't accept the dates that don't agree with what they think it should be, we can reject the dates. We can do that. So we're just being just consistent with the geologists. And so that's what I want to do. I just want to encourage you to, if you still sort of think about it and the way it goes. But you can know what happened in the past. You can know how long ago something's happened. Did you know you can do that? Did you know you can? I'll put it up. How do you know? Well, I know my age. How do I know my age? My mother was there at the time, and there was a doctor, right? So how do we know? The one sure way is there were eyewitnesses who were there, who did see it happen. if people did see it happen, and if they wrote it down in a written record, we know what happened in the past, and we know how long ago it was. Eyewitnesses and a written record, and I got a birth certificate there, right? Isn't that incredible? I mean, that's not complicated. We're all familiar with that, aren't we? We all know how that works. But we are sort of bamboozled by the way radioactive dating is presented to us, as if that's a whole different league, that they know things that we don't know. But we do know these things. And so, and the Bible gives us probably, the most consistent and amazing record for the age of the earth, and it's tied up in the genealogies. And I'll get to that, but that's how we know what happened in the past. The first fleet in Australia, down here towards Sydney, 26th of January 1788. How do we know that? They didn't do carbon dating on the ship. There were people here. Does that make sense? So this historical is what it is, and that's what the Bible says. Let every matter be established on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. That's how you know what happened. And why do you need 2 or 3? Well, some people might see it wrong. Some people might be lying. They might have an agenda. So you sort of need multiple witnesses. And so here's this genealogy from the Bible. And it starts up here with Adam. It's got pictures. The artist did these pictures, and it goes along the line, Adam all the way down to Noah, and then it goes all the way down to Abraham down the side, and then it comes across to King David. See that? They're people that they've got the history of them, what they did. And then there's 2 lines from King David. It goes down through Solomon and another line, and one of these lines comes through Joseph, and another line comes through Mary. Can you see that? And so we've got the history, the genealogies, all the way from Adam to Christ. And it's got the times in there as well. It says Adam was 130 years old when he begat Seth. And Seth was so many years old when he begat Enosh, and it goes through. And you can work it out very easily. You might think it's really complicated. I can get primary school kids to do this. And they can work out how long it was from Adam to the flood. And it's there in the Bible. They just copy the numbers onto a piece of paper, use a calculator, and they got the number, as long as they can copyright and read straight. But there you go. So isn't that incredible? The Bible's, the most consistent, reliable, and philosophical document that we have. And so I hope it's been an encouragement. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope you have. And we have a wonderful hope, don't we? And I hope what this has done is it sort of helped you to sort of see what the world looks like if you look at it from a different perspective. And once you do that, I hope it's helped you to see that, hey, it makes sense that way. And that means the Word of God is true. And I hope I've given you something. Well, I will give you something right now to help you, to sort of give you some ideas of how you can protect your family. There's a guy that was on our web page, Facebook page, and he said, he just made a comment, young fellow. He said, I've been reading creation stuff for years. And he says, it's a lot of fun. So the young lads was reading creation stuff. If you got boys, they probably would like reading creation stuff because they like sort of practical stuff often, not always. The girls like it too. But he says, it's a lot of fun. And he said, I actually find I'm acing Year 12 science. And he sort of attributes it to Creation magazine. This is what the magazine looks like, attributes it to Creation magazine. And he says, and actually, we're doing evolution at the moment. And he says, I seem to know more about it than my teachers. Because they don't learn the difference between natural selection and evolution. You see, and that makes a huge difference in helping in understanding. So the magazine, I just want to mention this to you. And I want to encourage you to think about, I should get this into my home. It comes out 4 times a year, and it's a magazine that deals with all these issues, and it's very attractive. They're very simple. It's family sort of level, and about dinosaurs and geology and biology and that sort of thing, which is really good. Something else I was going to say, but anyway, that's probably enough, nearly. But that's right. I was at a church once, just recently, and a lady saw this magazine, and she thought, we need that for our kids. And she said to her husband, she said, do we get Creation magazine? And he said, yeah, we do. I get it electronically. I can read it on my device. She says, what use is that? She said, we need them in our home. We need it so that kids can pick it up off the table. And so I just want to encourage you, if you can get stuff into your home where the kids can pick it up off the table, or if you've got grandkids can pick it up off the table, and they start to read it, you are starting to do your job as far as protecting your kids, bringing them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and sort of helping to guard against the stuff that they're picking up at high school and that, which they have to do because they've got to go to school. So the way you do it is there'll be sheets over the back there. They'll look like this, and it's about $35 or $32 or something for 1 year subscription. And what they'll do is the guys in here will give you a free back issue if you subscribe for a year. So you fill out your form, take it in there, and when you pay for it, they'll give you that as a free back issue. But if you take out a 3-year subscription, they'll give you a free back issue as well. But there's a voucher, and it gives you a $25 voucher where you get $25 off anything else on the tables there that you might find is helpful for your kids. So that's good. And I mentioned just a couple more. You might think, well, if you've got anything that's simple and that covers all the sort of things that I'm likely to encounter, well, we do. There is something available, and it's the Answers book. This is the Answers book. And it covers a lot of stuff. For example, were the days really 24-hour days? What about carbon dating? Who was Cain's wife? That's a question. You know, if there was Adam and Eve, did you mean to say that their children created incest? They did incest? That's the question that comes up. Well, there's a very logical answer, and they sort of think, people often think, we've got you. If you say that brothers and sisters married, they were doing incest. If you say that they married somebody else was around, well, who are they? Where did they come from? See the questions that are around. Anyway, so the Answers book, that covers the issues. And so you can get that, and that's a good one. Another book, if you want something a little bit more in depth, there's the Evolution's Achilles Heels, written by quite a number of PhD scientists. And then if you're looking for something that's sort of easy to read, then you've got the Defending Genesis. But the thing about the magazine is it comes out every 3 months. And so there's this ongoing revision. You know, we won't be back probably for years, but there's ongoing revision. The kids read it, and then another one comes in, and it's revised again. Do you know how that works? That's so important. And the other thing that may be useful is you probably have to strictly guard your kids against the use of devices, do you? I know my daughters do. Our kids are not happy with the way their devices are controlled. But there's Creation Ministries has produced in the last year or two a lot of videos on lots of different subjects, like what's it say here? What helium reveals about the Earth's age. So this is a guy who is in organic chemistry. He's set up a huge organic chemistry business and that. And so he's an expert. So he talks about the Earth's age. The problem that puzzle atheists. Dinosaurs never turned into birds. Have you heard people say that dinosaurs turned into birds? That's where birds came from. And Gippsland Cole, that's me, looking quite handsome there. They did me up. And anyway, there's this lady here saying about her brain, intricately designed. And there's another one about the origin of life. So I just want to encourage you. You know, there's a lot of stuff. We go out of our way to try to make this stuff available so that it impacts our culture. Would you say that our culture needs some impacting? I remember when you could teach RE in schools. It's banned here, isn't it? You can't. Can you teach it in New South Wales? But you have to opt in. Is that right? And do they teach it during school hours? They do. Well, in some places you can't do it in school hours. So there's been a huge changes. I'm in the Gideons. We used to be able to go into high schools and give out Bibles, and it's just changed in the last 5 years. So I just want to encourage you to say, hey, this is a way of impacting our culture. And we know that what the Lord Jesus said, that it says about him, that all things were made by him, and all things were made for him. And it's really wonderful to know him. And that's what you guys sang about, you know, when you sang this morning. So thanks very much. It's been good. I keep forgetting that word you said. But anyway, don't worry. Don't say it again. Don't say it again. Good on you.